There's chilling comedy on BBC One in 10 minutes with Gene Wilder as a radio star who's about to have the most terrifying time of his life when he's invited to a Gothic mansion for a haunted honeymoon. Here on Two in Half an Hour, we travel back in time for some classic sci-fi with William Hartnell, the very first Doctor Who. First, we set off in the TARDIS for a celebration of the 7 faces of the Doctor and his most infamous enemies. Resistance is useless.
Too hot for TV.
Welcome back to Doctor Who Too Hot for TV. We are the podcast that looks at all things Doctor Who Extended Universe. Today, I've got a brand new guest for the podcast, but it is someone I've podcasted with before on their own podcast. It's Jim Allenby. Jim, how are you?
Hello, Dylan. I'm not too bad, actually. It's very warm where I'm recording. I don't know if it's warm where you are, but it's warm here. It's too hot for podcasting. That's a bad dad joke.
We're starting on the right foot. We're the home of bad dad jokes.
But no, I'm doing great. How are you?
Yes, very well, thank you. It's wonderful to have you here, and we've been planning this for some time, and then life got in the way, and so I think we're about 6 months late, but we're here. Hooray. So I must start by asking you what I ask all my new guests. When did you and how did you become a fan of Doctor Who?
Oh, it's kind of one of those things that's been part of my life from a very, very early age. The first thing I remember of Doctor Who was the cliffhanger to episode 2, I want to say, of Time and the Rani, with Mel stuck in the bubble. And it was just on TV. My mum had the TV on, and it was on, and it was just kind of there in the background. So I watched a lot of season 24, 25, and 26. So there where my earliest memories come from. But my dad was also a huge Doctor Who fan. He grew up watching it during the 1960s. And he started buying VHS videos. So some of them really early ones are Day of the Daleks, Death to the Daleks, The Time Warrior. And it was through him that, I would go and visit him at the weekends. I would watch the videos, and he just started buying them every month. So it was kind of like an endless supply of Doctor Who. But it wasn't really, I suppose, until probably the early 90s when that's when I really felt my fandom clicked into place, rather than it just being a show that I was interested in and a show I was watching. This is when I started to actually discover aspects of the show and really kind of get my teeth into a lot of things.
And then what is your relationship with spin-off media? When did you realise it was more than a television show?
One of the first piece of merchandise I got was Doctor Who magazine, and I don't remember which issue it was. It might have been like 179 or something, but it had Tom Baker on the front with a blue Dalek, so it was he was in his medic's suit.
I know exactly the one you mean.
Well, my dad bought me that, and it was there was a comic strip in there, and I think it was called A Glitch in Time. It's a McCoy and Seventh Doctor and Ace comic strip. So it was through that I realised, there were comics, and then as I got more issues of Doctor Who magazine, I started to realise, there's books out there as well. So it was then that I started to acquire things like the Doctor Who yearbook, and I started to get other kind of books. Maybe not so much like New Adventures at that point, but I started to get Target books. And people would buy me Target books, people would buy me old Doctor Who annuals, and then it was then when I realised there was kind of like this expanded world out there beyond the TV show. Because really, I mean, when I became a fan of it, the TV show was finished. You know, like I say, I watched it in 1989, but when I became a fan, the show was already over with. So it was, for me, it was no longer a TV show. It was everything else around it.
And were there sort of key bits of merch that got you further into the show beyond the videos?
Yeah, I mean the Daypol figures. They were. I mean, we talked about them on my podcast. So the Daypol figures were there, and there were certain, like I say, the yearbooks. But there was also there was a book called the Terrestrial Index, which was kind of like my Bible into the series. I would just kind of endlessly flick through it, and it would give you. It was kind of like a companion piece to the program guide.
Yeah.
Whereas the program guide just gave you, like, I think it just gave you synopsis of everything. This went a little bit further. This kind of delved into like the history of Earth, basically told in order through Doctor Who stories, which I found quite fascinating. But it also it listed other things, so it would list like Doctor Who comics as well at the back, and the stories that had featured in the TV. Was it the TV Century ones?
Yeah, TV 21.
That's the ones. Yeah. So they have a list of all of those stories that were being published in those comics, and so this really was kind of like a key part of my kind of burgeoning fandom and discovering things and realizing there's so much more out there that I'd probably never get my hands on. Still haven't.
I remember that book well because it was, as you described, but it almost looked like a bit of a boring book for a child to read, and any child who wasn't into Doctor Who would have found it a boring book. But there was so much knowledge about the programme contained in it, and I can't say this for certain, but it listed Wartime in the back of it, the real-time spin-off. But so potentially it's the first time I ever heard of the Doctor Who spin-off Wartime, which obviously in turn leads to things that set me on the journey to hosting this podcast. So I can't say 100% it was the impetus, but it was quite big at the time to have something like that listed in what was essentially a sort of, as you say, companion to the program guide.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has like everything in there. I mean, the stuff in here, titles of Doctor Who comics that I've probably still never read them. Well, I won't have done because there's that many out there. But you know, Cybermen on Ice, which was published in 1969, issues 903 to 906. I don't know. I'm assuming this is
It'll be one of the TV comic ones.
miscellaneous fiction. Yeah, there's the Small Defender, Message of Mystery. These are all stories in the Dalek annual. So it listed everything, and it was like, oh my god, there's so much out there that I'm never going to get my hands on. But it's absolutely it's just fascinating. It lists the Find Your Fate books as well, and at the time, I think we only had the Target novels, so we didn't have the New Adventures, I don't think, when this came out. So it lists, Harry Sullivan's War, Turlough and the Earthlink Dilemma, and Canine and Company as well. So it was just kind of like this. It was strange reading it because it was like looking at these different things out there and knowing that you've probably never actually get access to them, but knowing that there was a full world out there, it was just fascinating.
What's also interesting is at the time you could still release a relatively small book that contained all of Doctor Who's spin-off media and the TV show, whereas now, like, you go on TARDIS Wiki and there's plenty of unfinished pages, but Lord knows, like, it would be tome after tome that never as we often hear on this podcast, when I list the things that just come out in 1 month in the last sort of decade, it's like it's more Doctor Who spin-off media than you could ever imagine.
It's insane, isn't it? You wouldn't be able to fit it all into one book now. Not a small little, I don't know how many pages there are, 250 pages in this or something. Absolutely no chance that you'd be able to do it these days.
It's a great book and definitely something that was a sort of a cornerstone of my fandom. As was the first thing we're going to talk about today. So why don't you tell everybody the first thing that you've picked?
We are going to be talking about Resistance is Useless, which I'm very surprised that nobody else has discussed.
No, well, somebody asked me to do it quite recently, and I was like, no. I've got Jim Allenby on the way to talk about Resistance is Useless. Resistance is Useless was broadcast on the 3rd of January 1992. It was narrated by Steve Steen, directed by Archie Lorchlan, and it was executive produced by John Whiston. Now, news at the time. Following Derek Sherwin's comments on Doctor Who's future, or his perceived lack of it, in the DWM Winter Special, the BBC's managing director of network television, Will Wyatt, made the following comments. While Mr. Sherwin is, of course, entitled to express views about the series, it would be a mistake to infer that in doing so he is reflecting the BBC's policies. I can appreciate your keenness for the BBC to commission a new series, but I can only reiterate that we have no plans to do so until we have complete confidence that it will be a major success. No news is good news, apparently, but there were people out there pitching, and there was a company called Darklight who wanted to shoot a pilot to be transmitted in late 1992 or early 1993. The company were planning to radically change the series so it would be new 50-minute episodes. They were planning 3 seasons. This is all according to Doctor Who magazine. And they were preparing plot lines at the time and doing design work for a new TARDIS and updated versions of the Cybermen, who will feature in the pilot, which at this stage also sees the destruction of Gallifrey.
Oh, that's never going to happen, is it, in the series?
No, they would never destroy Gallifrey. This is one of those pitches I don't remember anybody doing much on it. I'd love to find out more about it but the thing is with these things is you never know whether it was like a serious television company who had the gusto and the resources to sort of put together a pitch, or whether it was a bunch of mad fans, or whether it was somewhere in between, like the people behind the Doctor Who Last of the Time Lords film that was mooted for many years. That was a bunch of guys, including somebody who'd worked in the VFX department at the BBC, desperately trying to get this film off the ground. But because only made one tiny horror film before, nobody was going to give them $50 million or whatever it was they wanted. So they were, aiming too high. But I just love a glimpse into that world of, unmade Doctor Who.
It's exciting. I mean, we spent so many years around that time just seeing these different news stories come through to Gallifrey Guardian about who's going to do this, who's going to do that, who's going to play the Doctor. Is the TARDIS going to... I remember a story about the TARDIS having lips or something and rapping.
Yes.
And David Hasselhoff, and it's just madness. It's, the amount of nonsense that people were pitching at the time, or whether they were even pitching it, or it was just somebody picking up on a rumor here and there and then turning it into a news story. I don't know, but I just remember an endless stream of opening up DWM even at that time and seeing these different stories and these different ideas and thinking it's never going to come back.
Even when the show did come back, it felt like, oh, is it really going to come back, or is it not? And then it really started to pick up steam, and we're like, oh, this is actually going to happen. But I don't think I properly believed it until they'd started filming.
Even Paul McGann is the Doctor on DWM. I still didn't believe it at that point.
Yeah, the Paul McGann is the Doctor. It's just some bloke with short hair who I hadn't seen in anything at a Doctor Who exhibition. It could have been a fan film, Yeah. So the releases at the time, we had on VHS The Caves of Androzani and Robot. Doctor Who The Daleks, formerly titled Doctor Who and the Daleks, was reissued by Target Books. The novelisation of The Nightmare Fair was also reissued, and the comic strip was Conflict of Interest, featuring the Sontarans.
Too hot for TV.
So this documentary basically launched a season of Doctor Who Repeats, and I think it's a season of Doctor Who Repeats that is responsible for a lot of people our age's fandom. And we'll jump into like how they may or may not have affected us in a little bit. But another thing that I dug out as I was looking for news is that this repeat season's sort of fallen into legend of sort of the stories they did. But as of January, they knew they were going to show the Time Meddler, but they didn't know what the rest of the stories were going to be. So DWM reports that stories that they may show includes the Crotons, the Mind Robber, Terror of the Autons, the Green Death, Planet of Evil, Resurrection of the Daleks, Attack of the Cybermen, or Remembrance of the Daleks. Now, obviously, they didn't end up showing a lot of those, but it's quite interesting that they hadn't quite honed in. And, I think there's a world where, much like the Five Faces of Doctor Who, they went, oh no, well, we should start with an earthly child, but they realised perhaps it wasn't the most commercially viable. And you get, by launching with the Time Meddler, it's more representative of the Hartnell era than those first 4 episodes, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And that's quite interesting hearing you mention the Planet of Evil as well, which is, I mean, that's nobody's choice, is it? To be shown.
No, maybe Prentice Hancock's. I don't. But it's an interesting thing because these repeats were quite, they were attracting pretty much the same sort of amount of viewers as Battlefield and The Curse of Fenric and stuff like that. But again, I've said this before, but Britain's very nostalgic about Doctor Who at this point, even if there isn't a new series. What was the effect that these repeats had on you? Were you tuning in every week?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to say that, I loved the Time Meddler. Every time I rewatch that, it just takes me back to that Friday evening, watching that first episode, hearing those mentions about Ian and Barbara and thinking, well, what happened to them? Because I'd seen the Daleks, so I had that on VHS. That was the only William Hartnell story I'd seen, I think, up to that point. So it was kind of, again, it was like opening this world to me. And then the Mind Robber as well. It was that, firmly became a firm favourite of mine. But also I was kind of a little bit of a brat because we got to Genesis of the Daleks and I was frustrated because I think it was already out on VHS. So I was stamping my feet a little bit and saying, well, I've got to sit and watch this for 6 weeks now, but I've already got on VHS. And then they broadcast The Caves of Androzani as well, which was already out on VHS. So it was quite interesting that they'd chosen to broadcast stories that had already come out on VHS. But then they went to, Revelation was my first ever Sixth Doctor story, and Battlefield, which is, I love Battlefield, but it is a really interesting choice of, why would you show Battlefield over something like Remembrance of the Daleks or Curse of Fenric?
I can chart my fandom through these repeats because there's these and then there's more in 93 when we get to the sort of the 30th anniversary, because I had the same thing as you. Time Meddler, brilliant, never seen it. But then as we get into stories I have seen, so they showed the Sea Devils, didn't they, for Pertwee?
Oh, yes, they showed the Sea Devils.
Which I hadn't seen. It wasn't out at that point, so that was brilliant. But Genesis, as you say, I had Caves of Androzani. And I've said this before on podcasts, but somewhere around 92, 93, I went off Doctor Who for a little bit. And I can only think it must have been around the time of Caves, because Battlefield was the first Doctor Who story I ever saw on its original transmission. So I would have absolutely, if I'd been into Doctor Who again, been taping that. And I'd never seen Revelation, so I would have been taping that. So I was out. I was into football. The only time in my life I've ever been into football was for that 1 year. But by the time we get to November 93, I'm back in, and I've thrown away football because it's rubbish, and I have got back into Doctor Who. And I remember thoroughly regretting not having recordings of those two 80s stories well into the mid-90s. It's probably well into my mid-20s, but
Yeah, I mean, my dad would record them for me, and he'd do this annoying thing where he'd cut you get the continuity eye at the end of each episode saying, Doctor Who returns next week and whatever, and he would cut it before it got to the end of the title sequence, which, and I would be like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that for? But no, it was, for me, it was probably visually, that was my first real experience with each of the 7 Doctors.
Yeah.
And I always used to say, people say, oh, my favorite Doctor growing up was this Doctor. But I used to say, well, because of that repeat season, I kind of grew up over however many weeks that was with all of the Doctors. So,
Yeah.
they were all my Doctor at that time.
You're completing the puzzle as well, aren't you? You're at the behest of what's being repeated and what BBC Video are releasing. So, as you say, you don't have a Doctor. It's kind of all of them. And if there was a run of 3 Tom Baker videos, then Tom Baker was your Doctor for 3 months. And if it was a Colin and then a Syl, then so be it.
Yeah.
But as we said, the series kicked off with Resistance is Useless. Now, for anybody who's not seen this, shame on you, what you're doing here. What is it?
So, Resistance is Useless is a very interesting one because not only, this was my gateway, one of my gateways into the show. It's essentially a clip show, really. Yeah. And it's kind of looking back at the show of what's been and gone over the last, what would have been nearly 30 years at that point, introduced by a Brummy anorak. Why they made him a Brummy, I have no idea.
I could have done it. I'm a Brummy.
Are you sure it wasn't you?
I'm sure it wasn't me. We'll get into who it was a little bit later. But,
interesting. But it kind of, it came at a point in the show's history where Doctor Who was kind of being looked back on as more of a kind of an ancient relic, or maybe if not an ancient relic, kind of with a nostalgic look, rather than being something ongoing and fresh. So this for me feels like this was the kind of watershed. Until this point, there was always a chance that Doctor Who, as it was, might have come back. It was only 2 or 3 years after Survival. Anything after this, Doctor Who's been looked back on as something that used to be rather than something that's current.
Yeah, and we're sort of in the era, I think it's either the same year or the next year or just the end of the previous year where B Sky B do their big repeat season as well. Interestingly, they focus on the first 4 Doctors because there's a bad taste in the mouth, perceivably, about the 80s. But as you say, the nostalgia's starting to kick in, and it's that thing of anybody who was 10 in the 70s is now, in their late 20s, early 30s, and they are people with disposable incomes, and they're people who will be in on a Friday night, probably because they've got kids watching BBC Two, and you might convince them to go, oh, I used to love The Wheel in Space or whatever. I'm going to go out and get the VHS of it, and then they have to find out that it doesn't exist. But, it's sort of going, know your audience. And BBC Two was going a bit more cult, but it was also going a bit more nostalgia flavoured. And television was allowed to look a bit more inward on itself because it had built this vast catalogue of stuff that they were only now starting to exploit. I mean, there were repeats before, but they were rare. Certainly, before this, there'd only been one big repeat. Doctor Who and the Monsters and Doctor Who, the Five Faces of Doctor Who.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because towards the end of the 90s, that always feels like the point where all of a sudden everybody, the society, the public or whatever, that we all know them shows. I love the 1970s. I love the 1980s. It felt like at the end of the millennium, that's when people were looking back at things in the past. But really, like you say, the BBC Two were building up this cult kind of library. We had The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Randall and Hopkirk, the Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet, and it was all on BBC Two around about the same time.
And then you were getting brand new Star Trek from the States at sort of 6 o'clock tea time. And we're still a bit off the X-Files, but that's when they got into showing the brand new stuff as well. That was the gritty dramas.
Yeah.
Is it a good history of the series?
You see, I was thinking about this last night, and I mean, it's a very potted history of the series. I think it's because it's kind of grouped into different sections. You've got them looking at the monsters, you've got them looking at the Brigadier, the companion. So it's kind of almost like, if you want to know Doctor Who, then this is what it is. But I don't feel like you would get anything out of it if you didn't know Doctor Who, because some of those clips are shown in there's no context around those clips.
Absolutely. It's these, and I'd forgotten all about this, but it's divided up into sections that are linked by this anorak who says no more than like 2 sentences on anything. But the sections are thoughts of an anorak, time and relative dimensions in space, fad gadgets, fashion victims, leave it to me, dear, the Brigadier's finest moments, behind the sofa, effects, special, death by special effects, and give it all you got, surreal, and Doctor in charge. And basically, they find a couple of clips that represent each of those titles. Like, it's very loosely strung together. In fact, it's the sort of thing nowadays you would find on someone's YouTube channel.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that the clips that they use, not all of them, but most of them focus on the 1960s and the 1970s.
Yeah.
There's very few that focus on anything from the 80s, I noticed.
And the 80s stuff tends to feature Davros or the Daleks, it's the big hitters. But it is interesting, isn't it? That, I mean, those are the eras that people are nostalgic about, because while there's a perceived sort of dislike of 80s Doctor Who, also the 80s Doctor Who fans are still 12 or whatever. They will grow up and there'll be as much fondness for 80s Doctor Who, just as the people who were into RTD1 came of age and are now sort of bigger voices in fandom. And there are people who have grown up on the current era of Doctor Who, while, there's lots of people going, I don't like this version of Doctor Who, myself included. But if you are 10 and loving this, in 10 years' time, you'll be on the equivalent of Twitter talking about how it was the best time to be a Doctor Who fan.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as well, I think a lot of criticism has been thrown at it to say that it's just taking the piss out of Doctor Who. But I don't know. I don't know if, it's got a bit of, it's tongue-in-cheek humour a little bit, but it's kind of gentle mocking. It's clearly, I mean, I say it's clearly, I'm assuming it's put together by people who know the show.
Well, not so much. I mean, Ian Levine and Steve Roberts are credited as advisors on it. But the people who made it, as far as I can tell, are not fans. So you've got narrator Steve Steen is not a Brummie. He's put on that accent because he thinks that's the accents of Brummies. He was a comedian. He'd been on episodes of Whose Line Is It Anyway, Happy Families, Have I Got News for You, a bit of Fry and Laurie. He'd been in Red Dwarf, Blackadder. He's just a jobbing voiceover person within the industry. They've got to do it and play this little part. Archie Lachlan, the director, is someone that's got a few credits on comedy things like That Phil K video. Then he's made a few documentaries recently. And John Whitston, the executive producer, is also an exec on 30 Years in the TARDIS, but he is responsible for loads of 90s stuff, including TV Hell, Shooting Stars, The Danny Baker Show. So these are very much jobbing people within the industry who have said, you've got 30 minutes before this repeat season, you need to put together a Doctor Who clip show. And I'm assuming they're all at the beginning of their careers and they go, well, we're going to take the piss out of it a little bit, in a loving way, I think, with this anorak. But then they've obviously turned around to Steve Roberts and Ian Levine and gone, we really need some help picking these clips. Now, the clips aren't always from the most obvious of stories, I'd say. But it was, for me, I mean, this was a goldmine. I don't know how you felt. It's like, I could never hope to see all these stories, and it would have been my first experience of so many of them, and to just get little bits of them. I mean, like, within about 3 clips, you get a monoid, and
you've got Cybermats as well. You've got clips from The Wheel in Space. And it's funny, thinking about these clips, because they are edited together really well. There's kind of like a rhythm. I mean, especially during the opening theme, where they're kind of the counting down, and then it starts playing the theme tune, and you've got all these different clips of people kind of collapsing against walls in the invasion. And it's also very strange for me as a child, because I'd not seen a lot of these stories. I had no idea that these clips were from separate stories. So, for example, there's a clip from Logopolis where the TARDIS lands next to the police box on the Barnet bypass,
Yeah.
and then it cuts to a scene with Mel and Ace in the TARDIS from Dragonfire. I assumed, because I'd never seen those stories before, I assumed it was from the same story.
Yeah, I mean,
So
why
it was
wouldn't you?
really confusing. There's a similar, like, Ambassadors of Death. There's the scene where the Doctor and Liz are swapping places around the console, and then Liz grabs hold of the console, and it cuts to a scene of the TARDIS in space, kind of just blurring. I can't remember what story it's from. And again, I just assumed that was from the same story, and therefore I assumed that the room they were in Ambassadors of Death was the TARDIS console room. And I used to
Yeah.
think, what the hell have they done to it? So in many ways, as much as it kind of informed and educated me about Doctor Who, it also gave me false ideas of some of these stories.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think you're trying to piece things together again. It's not all there for you. So you get these little glimpses and, you know, you do the best you can with them. I remember the things I got very excited about seeing this, where I would have seen them for the first time, and I still know to this day, is seeing the Underwater Menace clip of the fish people dancing and that weird music. Seeing something from the Web of Fear, I remember seeing Ambassadors of Death, because that seemed impossible. As you say, that weird going, what did unto the TARDIS? And just all these amazing clips presented in like an unrestored format. You know? Like some of the Pertwee ones are in black and white. The black and white stuff is very fuzzy. The colour stuff is very fuzzy. It's very soft. And oh my God, the rush of nostalgia. Like I watched a version of this on Daily Motion, and someone's done a remastered version. Not interested in your remastered version. Give it me. Recorded off television with unrestored archive. That is how. Don't get me wrong, I'm very grateful for all the restorations we get on the Blu-ray sets. But I'm also a sucker for a shoddy VHS off-air recording.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, there's nothing more exciting than putting on the iPlayer and realizing they've uploaded a crap, unrestored version of the Reign of Terror.
Now, Doctor Who fans lose their shit about that. Do you know why that is?
No.
So, when you remaster something, it becomes a new master that starts a new copyright period and is copyright the people who restore it. So BBC Studios own all those remasterings. What the BBC own is what's in their archive. So they've gone down to their archive or into their digital archive, pulled up this file, and it's the thing that was pulled off pulled off a shelf 15 years ago and digitized, and that is the best version of it that the BBC iPlayer have access to. And occasionally, because it's a special release or something, someone will go, oh, we probably want the BBC Studios version. But a lot of the time, BBC Studios will go, no, we're still exploiting and selling this. We don't want you giving it away for free. You can have that cruddy old version. It's all like a business thing. It's not because the BBC hates you or can't be bothered. It's that is the best version that is available to the people on iPlayer.
That's insane. But I mean, again, this documentary is very much like it's not really a documentary. I keep saying documentary. It's a clip show, isn't it? But it's kind of a time capsule of where we were at that time in the 90s. You know, we've got black and white clips from the Demons and from Terror of the Autons before they've actually been colorized.
Only the next year, the Demons would be on color on this very channel.
Yeah, it's madness. It's so, and also, I don't know how you feel, but sometimes when I go back, and especially probably the 60s stuff, if I sit and watch I don't know, Wheel in Space, I never pick the Wheel in Space to watch, but I'm watching the Wheel in Space, or once it gets to that scene with the Cybermat in it, I automatically get pulled straight back to watching Resistance is Useless. It's like these scenes just kind of pull me back.
Absolutely. There was an episode of like the Aztecs, wasn't there, where the theme tune was slightly out of sync with the visuals, and it sort of goes, and it's like, that's how I expect that episode of the Aztecs to start every time. Or the 90-minute edits of the omnibus edits of like the early stories. I'm still shocked when Talons of Weng Chiang A has cliffhangers, but B doesn't have red text in the titles at the end.
Or is it Death to the Daleks with the pink credits at the end as well?
Love that stuff.
I'm surprised a disgruntled Doctor Who fan on Twitter perhaps hasn't yet complained that we don't have the original VHS edits as special features. I know we do. We do have some of them, don't we? But we haven't got like Spearhead from Space and cliffhangerless ones. Or have we?
We've got our own missing episodes, us fans of the 90s, you know? One day I think I will convert all my old, because I've still got them, I'll convert them to digital just so, because again, we're getting sidetracked, but I'm a nerd. In lockdown, I converted everything I'd ever recorded off television on VHS that had been in boxes at my dad's onto digital. So I can sit and watch Resistance is Useless and The Time Meddler from that night in 1992 with little bits of the idents and the continuity announcements in between. And I have been known to do it from time to time.
That's all you need, innit? You don't need some bloody sparkly restored version on Blu-ray.
No, with the missing stabbings recreated. What I want a BBC Two copy.
Well, they'd also at the time they shown before. I think it was the year before they showed the original pilot episode.
Yeah,
which my dad had recorded. So there was kind of that. There was Resistance is Useless, and then The Time Meddler, and that was like kind of my three visual things on TV to kind of jumpstart me into the fandom.
What do you think about the production values of these little skits with the anorak? Do they work for what they are?
I mean, as a kid, you just kind of sit there and you just watch it. You know, you don't. I don't know. I think probably it's kind of early 90s mysterious, isn't it? A bit of smoke. You can't see the face inside the anorak because it's clearly not there. It's just an anorak shoved on a probably tailor's dummy or something like that. But I think probably if it was done now, there'd be a little bit more movement in there. They'd try and put a little bit of animation into it rather than just having a really dull sounding guy talk to you.
Now, what I never remembered is, well, what I don't remember from when I previously saw it is that they did something quite snazzy to the credits. So you get the voice of the anorak, Steve Steen, and then it goes, thanks to space-time visualizers Ian Levine, Steve Roberts, and the Doctor Who exhibition. All very exciting. And then they try and give everybody a Doctor Who-related title. So we've got Monoid Graphic Designer, TARDIS Camera, Lights flashing. I don't know what. Refusian Floor Manager.
Does that mean he wasn't there?
Yeah. Most credited person, Dick Mills, for some reason. So none of these really work. But then the one that does work, the unit manager is spelled U.N.IT. That's very good. Consultant Time Lord John Nathan Turner, Yeti production assistant, cyber videotape editors, Doctor's assistant producer, that sort of works. Executive master producer and Director Who. Now that one works, but it's just like there's no need. There's no need, guys.
Am I a bad fan to say that I'd never noticed that before?
I hadn't noticed it until last night when I was watching this.
I didn't even notice it last night.
Yeah. I couldn't believe it. I was like, has someone done this? It's like, no. It's just like, has someone done this on the YouTube? No. This is how it went out. It's on the wiki, so it must be true.
And again, that's kind of, again, just taking a bit of a tongue-in-cheek look at the show. So it seems to be that's the style they were going for.
I do like the way that at the end they're like, we're running out of time, so they just speed up the Anorak's voice. I thought that was quite funny.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting production. You would never do something like this now. Clip shows, I mean, aren't as regular, but they're also, if you do get them, you'd get a lot more talking heads. And, they did that one for the 50th where it was about 4 hours long or something on BBC Three. But you got enough talking heads of crappy celebrities and Doctor Who stars that, you could get through it. But I think as a primer before a series of repeats, I think it's quite interesting to go, look what's coming next. Like you could get some of this. You could see the Dance of the Fish people in all its glory.
Yeah. And also I think clip shows are kind of redundant now because everything is so accessible. Back then, 30 odd years ago now, isn't it? You couldn't see this stuff. Yeah. So this was a really exciting glimpse into what Doctor Who was. and where we'd been. Now, I don't think I would get this excited over a clip show. I mean, maybe kids these days would do, but
They've got YouTube for it now. If they put on Disney Plus and like 73 yards and they want to know more about the show, they'll go on YouTube and go History of Doctor Who, and there'll be a 15-minute video with some clips that will give them all this and more.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a 7-year-old son who insists on watching Mr. Ring-a-Ding bloody countless times on YouTube. Just Mr. Ring-a-Ding singing, though. It's never, I was like, let's watch an episode. No.
Well,
what are we going to do? Just watch Mr. Ring-a-Ding.
Generating content. Is there anything else you want to say on this?
Only that I think you had to be there at the time to understand what this meant to. So what it meant is, it's not like a huge piece of artwork, is it? But I think unless you were there, unless you were, me and you were roughly the same age, so that kind of age, kid, maybe a little bit older, I don't think you get how important this was. For me, for myself at least, about to become a fan.
Yeah.
This was, I keep saying a gateway, but it was a gateway. There's so many things in my life that were gateways into Doctor Who, but this was one of them. And I do think you had to be there. I would love to see not a restored version, but the original released on a collection box set or something. I don't know where the rights are with that, but
well, the reason it never came out as like on a VHS or on a DVD is because the restoration team thought it was taking the piss out of Doctor Who, so didn't want it included. And I think that's a mistake. I think, as you say, to a certain generation of people, this is as important as Who's Doctor Who, which I know is a better documentary and gives more insight into the times. But in a weird way, this gives an insight into the times of how the show was seen and perceived. And, it was an important thing to people our age. So I do think this is our goddamn cultural heritage.
Exactly.
Release it now. But yeah, so I hope if the Wilderness Era box set does ever appear, even if it is just like a TV movie with loads of VAM, that this is somewhere on it, because it is. We may have seen all the clips now, but it was important.
You may have seen all the clips now, but you haven't seen them like this.
Well, exactly. So we must rate it. Is it a clanger, a banger, or an average meander?
It's got to be a banger.
It's got to be a banger.
It's just automatically a banger.
Yeah.
Just because of what it is and when it came.
It's 30 minutes of rapid-fire, unseen Doctor Who. It promised a world of adventure, and it promised a lifetime of chasing down those stories in various formats until you were sick of them all.
It's Doctor Who heroin injected into your eyeballs.
Brilliant.
Too hot for TV.
So the next thing we're going to cover is a Seventh Doctor and Ace big finish called The Grey Man of the Mountain. It was released on the 8th of December 2020 and recorded on the 23rd and 24th of July 2020. It was written by Elizabeth Miles, directed by Sam Clemens, and produced by David Richardson and Emma Haig. News at the time, the Season 8 Blu-ray was announced as coming out later in the year. Web of Fear Episode 3 was set to be animated. The 10th Doctor was about to meet Nyssa, Ace, Leela and K9 in a new set of adventures. And BBC Learning had a new partnership with a company called Tinker to teach kids about coding via Doctor Who stories.
Oh, interesting.
So if you ever want to learn coding, guys, there's a Jodie Whittaker-based adventure out there somewhere online where you can learn all about it.
Oh, if it's Jodie, I'm quite happy to delve into that.
I'm there. Now, a lot of releases around this time. We're at the other end of the spectrum, so bear with me, and if I pass out reading them, call an ambulance. From Big Finish, we had Bernie Summerfield, The Christmas Collection. Bernie Summerfield, A Visit from Professor Summerfield, which went out on their YouTube. We had A Plight of the Pimpernel with the Sixth Doctor and Perry. Mutually Assured Destruction with the Eighth Doctor. Genetic of the Daleks with the Fourth Doctor. The Robots Volume 3. And Torchwood the Crown. From BBC Audio, we had the 10th Doctor story, The Mines of Magnox. On YouTube, we had a Dalek and Mechanoid animation, and the two episodes broadcast at the time were The Deadly Ally and Day of Reckoning. The comic strip was Whitegrass, featuring the 13th Doctor and the Fam. From BBC Books, we had a book featuring the 10th, 9th and 8th Doctor called All Flesh is Grass. Series 7 had just had a Steelbook box set. There was a K9 book called Megabytes. Then we had the Eramen anthology, The Jewels of Cleopatra, the Lytton comic, Crime Like Politics is Always Personal, and the Lethbridge Stewart book, Domination Game.
That's a lot.
If you wanted Doctor Who for Christmas, you would have got it. You would have got a lot. We're also but it should be said, we're slap bang in the middle of Time Lord Victorious, so quite a few of those were tied into that. But yeah, there was a lot of stuff. So you'd be forgiven for not having heard all of those things or consume them all, because there was a lot out there. And, most people have to keep the electricity on and eat food. So
I think the only thing I got, I didn't even get it. It was the YouTube animation, the Dalek and Mechanoid one, which nobody seemed to like.
Yeah.
That went down like a bucket of sick.
I need to revisit that at some point, because I remember it being fairly inoffensive. I can't remember thinking, it was the greatest Dalek story ever, but there's something I quite like about CGI Dalek. So I'm there for it. There were lots of fan CGI Dalek things before the show came back on, like in the early days of YouTube. So
yeah,
quite reminiscent of them.
Too hot for TV.
The Doctor, Ace and the Brigadier investigate mysterious disappearances on a Scottish mountain, linked to sightings of a terrifying creature known as the Grey Man. As they climb the snow-covered mountain with a group of locals, they encounter a portal to a parallel Earth inhabited by the Grey Man. Tall primal beings whose presence induces madness in humans. With tensions escalating after a tragic act of violence, the Doctor and the Brigadier must broker a peace to prevent disaster.
Too hot for TV.
So, when did you first come to this, and why did you choose it today?
Well, I used to be a big collector of Big Finish, and I started getting it probably about 2000, and I collected them religiously. And then they started releasing more ranges, and I kind of had to say, well, I'm just going to focus on these ones. And then it got to about 2013, and I just lost interest. So I didn't really revisit Big Finish until this came out. And I think what attracted me to it to start with was that it was a Seventh Doctor and Ace story, which I'm a big fan of them. I obviously, they were as far as I was concerned, the Seventh Doctor was the Doctor until McGann came along. So, during the early 90s. So he was my Doctor, and Ace was my companion. And I was a big fan of especially season 25 and 26. And I'd heard lots of Big Finish stories with the Seventh Doctor before. I loved the stuff with Ace and Hex. I think Gods and Monster trilogy and stuff like that that's like peak Doctor Who Big Finish for me. But I think what drew me to it most was because it had the Brigadier in, and I, of course, had not heard any recasts before, but Battlefield was one of my favourite Doctor Who stories. So automatically I thought, well, I'm going to have to get this because it's got the Brigadier and it's got the Doctor and it's got Ace in it. So that was initially what drew me to it. And I just fancied listening to a Doctor Who audio that wasn't connected to anything else, because at the time we were, and we still are, there's so many kind of elements thrown into each Doctor Who play that this felt like something standalone.
Yeah, so it's an interesting one because I think it benefits from that. I'd heard this before as well around the time it came out, and I remember thinking it was all right, like I didn't love it because of a lot of the things you mentioned. Like my favourite era of the classic series was the Seventh Doctor, and the Seventh Doctor at Big Finish did some amazing heavy art-based stuff that to me are the pinnacle of Big Finish. So I put this on and sort of went, oh yeah, that's fine. That's another bit of Doctor Who. I'm suffering from Big Finish fatigue at this point. So I was just sort of like, yeah, whatever. I didn't have anything particularly positive to say. I didn't have anything particularly negative to say. So when you mentioned doing it, I was like, oh, it'd be nice to revisit this with some perspective, and now having dipped into so many eras of Big Finish. And while I'm a fan of those big arcs and things like that, I find the box set sometimes a little bit impenetrable, especially if I don't know who the companions were. So it was really nice to come back to this and it just be a self-contained four-part Doctor Who story, like the old days. Um, in and suddenly I was in just a much better mindset for it, and had because it's almost, although there are some interesting story elements that are a bit more modern, it's probably the most traditional Doctor Who story I think you could put this companion and Doctor in, because we're used to them being in Cartmel style stories or much bigger stories, and here they are. They're stuck up a mountain. It's a mountain under siege, essentially. There's some modern, like I say modern like I'm an old man. There's more contemporary character work done with people, but actually it's very trad Doctor Who, and in itself it's quite unique to hear the Seventh Doctor and Ace in a story like that.
Yeah, and I think as well, I think that's probably. I mean, I didn't know what to expect when I listened to it the first time, and I did get it that Christmas as well, and I think that's what probably appealed to me. You know, we'd had. I mean, I was sort of still listening to the Eighth Doctor stuff at the time, and we had. I think Stranded was out around about this time. And I think just hearing something that felt so traditional and I don't want to say normal, but you know, because it is a pretty basic story. There's nothing, you know, there's no bloody timey-wimey shenanigans going on in this, really. It just felt really easy to listen to.
Yeah.
And I think that's what was putting me off Big Finish for so long. In-depth plots and characters here, there, and everywhere, and just everything being thrown into the mix. And this, for me, I just switched it on and I went and I listened to it over a couple of runs, and it just that basic style of storytelling really kind of sunk its teeth into me.
Absolutely. And it was also like, I hadn't clocked that it's essentially a Christmas special, not a heavy Christmas special. It's not Attack of the Killer Christmas Trees or something like that, but it does Christmas so subtly. And I'm not a big fan of Doctor Who Christmas specials. Some of them float my boat, but I always find them a bit much. So it was quite nice to hear what a Christmas special might have looked like in 1990 or something like that, had the show continued, where, you know, they all sing at the end and there's mentions of getting back to Doris for Christmas, but essentially it's just a bunch of characters lost and potentially under threat on the side of a mountain. And sure, like, you could cut this down to 60 minutes and probably not lose that much stuff, but if you're after just a bit of classic Doctor Who, then I don't feel the need. There's always the need to do that, because it doesn't feel like it drags at any point.
No,
which a lot of 4-part big finishes, I think, do when you approach them with sort of modern viewing habits.
Yeah, I think as well. You kind of you're listening to it, and you kind of, because it's got that kind of sedate pace, you feel like you can spend a bit of time with it, and you can actually, I don't want to say switch off where you're listening to it, but you can kind of just relax and sit back. Because I re-listened to it in a couple of nights, last night and the night before, and it was just really pleasurable just to sit here and listen to something so really gentle. And that makes it sound like it's a, you know, there's no threat in the story, but it was just a really easygoing story that it doesn't expect you to do too much.
Absolutely. I could imagine, and somebody out there should do this, and maybe I'll do it one day. It's getting towards Christmas. You go to your local pub, you're by yourself, you just want a quiet pint after work or something like that. You sit by a burning fire and have a beer or a whiskey or something. And I imagine you could sit there quite easily for 2 hours and then get up and not be able to walk because you've accidentally drank too much, but had a lovely time, just sort of sat there. I can see like a festive moment, like right there, of just like, oh, what a nice way to spend an evening. I would want to spend an evening in the company of this play again, which I know is a weird thing to say, but because it's not big story where, oh my God, look what happens, and it's not spare parts. It's just like, oh, what a nice way to spend 2 hours.
Well, this is it. I mean, I was listening to it the first time, and I was expecting there to be something, some heavy continuity stuff thrown into the last episode, because there's people disappearing, and there's invisible barriers and this, that, and the other. And I thought, something's going to happen. There's going to be some timey wimeyness going on, and it's just not. It's just very, very simple, and I think as well, like the kind of the themes of the story. I mean, you got Christmas in there, but it's I'm drawn to stuff like folklore and ghosts and hauntings, and the kind of stuff on the mountains. I'm a huge fan of stories like the Demons and the Stones of Blood and the Awakening, Image of the Fender. I love stuff like that. That's why I loved 73 Yards so much, because it's just creepy, weird folklorist stuff. Big Finish is kind of, they don't do it very often, but they've kind of gone into doing things like that before. I remember Spectre of Lanyon Moor was another one that I really enjoyed, and we the Chimes of Midnight. I know that's more of a haunted house, even though it's not a haunted house, but it's and The Witch from the Well, and it's that kind of genre. It's that kind of spooky type of Doctor Who story that I really like.
Yeah, it's a ghost story for Christmas done for Doctor Who, for 80s Doctor Who, and again, it might have jarred with me slightly because we just had Jodie's second series on TV at that point, which I loved. And, we've had the canon-shattering Timeless Child and Ascension of the Cybermen and Villa Diodati and all these things where it's like there's loads of twists and turns and a new mythology thrown in. And then the next year we'll get Flux, so which is like this 6-part epic which throws everything at it. So I can imagine why me loving that version of Doctor Who, why this little 4-parter didn't stand a chance at the time.
Yeah, and I get that, but it's it is it's just a simple story. It's got a just beginning, middle, and an end, and sometimes we need that. I think sometimes we need it to kind of balance out the insanity that we get on Doctor Who sometimes.
So it's Lisbeth Miles who writes the script. Now, we've talked a lot about sort of the simplistic nature of it, and she's written quite a lot of Big Finish, and she's a podcaster and all these other things. But I don't want to think that we're, by saying it's subdued and simplistic, that we're sort of shooting her down in any way, shape or form. So what do you think of the way the story unravels, what it does with the characters, things like that?
I mean, it's interesting because, it drops people into, it drops the Seventh Doctor and Ace into the story very gently. They're going to it's New Year's Eve or something that they're going to in Edinburgh, and obviously they're not there. They're in a village. So it very cleverly, but it introduces you to each character. It doesn't overburden you introducing you to these characters. And what I like is that it builds upon this mystery. So we start with the Hook, obviously at the start with the hikers, one of them escaping and one of them disappearing, and so that already you're interested because you've got that hook, but then it slowly layers on the mystery as the story goes. In fact, the whole concept of the Grey Man is, you don't really get to see exactly what that is until the last episode. So you kind of kept on the hook the entire time throughout the story. And, that for me is keeping me in suspense, is what I like when I'm listening to, or even when I'm watching something on TV. I don't want all the answers given to me straight away. So to kind of delay that for me is what I think works really well for this story. It just keeps layering that mystery.
And I think there's a worry that, is this just going to be a retelling of The Abominable Snowman or something like that? And there's always that danger that that's what it's going to be. But actually, it's got more in common with sort of later era Primeval. I don't know whether you ever watched Primeval, but it was these sort of jumps into the past and to dinosaurs, but later on it became sort of future kind. And with this, it's sort of, the Doctor sort of slips into, it's basically an alternative Earth, right?
Yeah, it's a parallel Earth. I'm assuming where things didn't develop in the same way.
Mm.
I don't think it's ever really explained how it's came to be this kind of parallel dimension. The grey men, they're kind of the largely unseen, and I think as well, I don't think anybody listening to this would want a full explanation for what's going on in the story.
Yeah.
So the fact that it's kept still a little bit in the dark of what's going on here is, I think that's another hook for me.
I enjoy the way that when we do get the explanation of the grey men, it's not a complete explanation. It's like they're some sort of pre-human life form or another evolved version of humanity, a different route taken. But when people see them, they are terrified because of a sort of repressed primal fear. It's a genetic memory to be scared of these things. And the story could have very easily gone down to the Brigadier bombing them all. But it's developing these characters. And actually, at the end of the day, the Brig recognizes sort of warrior to warrior how to broker a peace with these creatures he can't communicate with. And they get helped out of the alternative dimension in the end and offered some berries and some meat.
Yeah.
And that sounds cheesy, me explaining it, but it's actually quite a lovely moment and handled really well, especially in the context of a Christmas special. And you go, oh, yeah, because the Brig has developed after, fighting alongside the Doctor and sometimes, against the Doctor for 30 years. And he now knows he can solve these situations. And it's almost a trick of the universe that these people are so scared of the grey men, and they're actually just sort of a cultured but primitive race.
Yeah, and the whole thing about them, don't look at their faces, kind of it's developed as a defense mechanism for them, which I find quite interesting. But it's funny you say about the Brigadier. It almost feels like, and I didn't notice this at the first time I listened to it, but re-listening to it, almost feels like this is the Brigadier is the lead in this story. The Seventh Doctor is kind of really pushed to the side a bit because they do some odd things with his character once he looks at the grey men, and it sends him as ever so slightly odd, which then kind of pushes the Brigadier out to the front, and it's almost like the Brigadier is the reasonable, the rational one within the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an interesting thing to do. It's sort of taking the know-it-all Seventh Doctor and putting him on the back foot and allowing the other characters around him to shine. Not that they didn't get their chance during the era, and we do get a bit of that Brigadier and Ace relationship that was a bit more confrontational, but it's mellowed, and so it's a bit more sort of Mickey-taking, and you feel like there's some genuine affection between the two of them there. And then, of course, we get Ace's story. How did you feel about Ace's evolution within the story?
I like Ace and Kirsty because she gets paired up with Kirsty basically for the majority of the story. It's really interesting with Ace because we don't quite know when this story is set. Like, from our point of view, within time, and from Ace's point of view, she doesn't. We mentioned things like vlogs and Wi-Fi and things like that, and Ace doesn't know what they are.
Yeah.
So this is quite clearly back in the past, for closer to season 26 for her, I would assume.
But they do something with her hair on the cover that makes you go, she's slightly old. Like, she does look slightly older than she does.
Yeah. So it's really strange. But as for when the story is set, I know it's going a bit away from Ace, but as for when the story is set, it's clearly meant to be set kind of nowadays, which started getting me thinking about, well, how old is the Brigadier at this point? But anyway, that's something that we might cover later. But I like how she kind of pairs herself up with Kirsty and befriends her in much the same way that she did with like Kathleen in The Curse of Fenric, Kara in Survival. And I like that the Doctor trusts her to go off by herself and do her own thing as well.
Yeah. There's some interesting readings of Ace, and you can read these how you want. If they're there, they're there. If they're not, they're not. In my mind, Ace is a young woman who, if she's not bisexual, she's certainly, whether she's gay or straight or whatever, she's certainly open to relationships with and encounters with different genders. There is something about her relationships, be it Mike in Remembrance or the soldier in Curse of Fenric, but also Kathleen in Curse of Fenric, the woman in is it Gwendolyn in
Yeah.
Ghostlight,
Hmm.
and obviously Kara in Survival, that says this is a modern woman who is not afraid to explore her sexuality. That's one reading. It's not like 100%, but I think it's right there in the subtext. And
Yeah.
this does something quite interesting. Like, modern Doctor Who is very much show, don't tell. For whatever reason, Chris Chibnall chose to play his queer representation one way, Russell T Davies another louder way, whatever. In this, she goes on an adventure with this woman, Kirsty, who she's just split up with her girlfriend. And they go on this adventure and have one of those relationships that Ace has with many a character during her time on TV. And at the end, there is a very subtle kiss goodbye. You don't know whether it was on the lips, on the cheek, on the hand, but you can get from the way the two women have played it that this is something that means more than, me giving someone a peck on the cheek. And I think it's lovely how that's played, and just a lovely bit of character development for Ace.
Yeah, and actually by the end of it, I was quite sad to see Kirsty go,
Yeah.
because I quite liked how their relationship developed. I mean, it's Kirsty clearly says at the start that she had a girlfriend, and I did probably think at some point Kirsty was going to say that she actually had feelings for Ace, and I'm glad they didn't do it. I'm glad they didn't shoehorn that into it. But it is very nice, and it's a very gentle and lovely kind of developed relationship that they go through. And yeah, I was really, really sad to see Kirsty leave at the end of it.
Absolutely. Now, I don't know whether Big Finish do anything else with Ace's sexuality and telling more stories like that. I'd be keen to know if anybody out there knows and says, listen to this one. I will check them out. Do you have any idea?
No, I mean, I got to the end of the Hex stuff, and that was really where I left the Seventh Doctor. So I have no idea whether they developed anything any further.
But Ace has dalliances with men in those stories as well, and I think it's nice that the writer of this, Elizabeth Miles, has gone, do you know what? I think it's worth exploring something that was definitely on screen in her era, and I hope there is more of that, because it's so beautifully done and so subtly done, and just like a great. Who would think this is coming towards the end of the main range of Big Finish before they go into box sets? Big Finish have been doing Doctor Who for 20 odd years at this point. Sylvester McCoy and Sophie Aldred have been playing these parts for on and off for like 30, 40 years, whatever it is, 30 years. That there could be a story that just adds a little bit of character development and something to a 50-year-old woman playing the part at this point. It's like, it proves there's still interesting stuff to be done with these characters if you're telling the right story.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's sad in some ways that it often feels like some of these things aren't picked up again with Big Finish. Like, this probably just ends there. I mean, like I say, I don't know, but it because the story feels so inconsequential, sounds a really bad way to describe it, but it feels like it's just going to be left there, and there's never going to be anything developed further from that. So often I sit there and I think, well, what was the point in that? And that sounds awful, because I don't mean it that way, but it's like, it would be nice if Big Finish could pick up on it and develop that, and actually throw Ace into a relationship with somebody, whether that's male, female, whatever. But it kind of feels like we won't go anywhere, sadly.
Yeah, no, there is a bit of that, but who knows? Maybe they do. Maybe there's a whole box set where Ace is just shagging away through it. But I also think, like, in the 90s, we were very much used to Ace being a sexual character within the New Adventures and shagging a lot of men. But that is very much a young man's idea of what they wanted Ace to be. Whereas I think Elizabeth Miles is coming from a female perspective, and just existing in an era where drama, even mainstream populist drama like Doctor Who, is a lot more, the characters in it are a lot more considered, and their character arcs and their stories. So she's gone, no, of course she didn't go out into space and just shag every man. I mean, she might have done, but actually when you look at those relationships she has in the TV series, they're a bit more intense than just a cheap shag, you know?
Yeah, I think so. What else has Lisbeth Miles written?
She's written lots of stuff for various ranges, but she's not someone that's like, oh, I've made my name in this range. So for the main range, she's done a short story in Breaking Bubbles and Other Stories. She's done a Fourth Doctor, a Ninth Doctor, a novel adaptation, a First Doctor, 12th Doctor, Diary of Riverside. It's almost like she's got one or two in nearly every range, to be honest,
Yeah.
as I go through it. And I would definitely like to check out more of her work, because I do think this is a really interesting take on classic Doctor Who.
And I like how she just kind of expertly weaves in this kind of Scottish folklore legend of the Grey Man into a Doctor Who story.
And I think I'm right in saying she is Scottish, if I remember hearing her on podcasts. Correct.
Yeah.
The person I'm thinking of.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always great when people bring a bit of their own cultural heritage to the show. And again, we're telling quite a traditional story, but it's just sort of zhuzhed up a little bit by someone who actually knows what the story's about.
Yeah.
How did you feel about the general sound design, music, direction? Does it all hold together?
I think so. I thought the music was nice. It was, from what I gather, a lot of big finishes these days launch into a story with big bombastic orchestral kind of sweeping things, and it doesn't do that in this story. So it's very gentle. You get hints of Christmas tunes within the music, which is also nice, but also the music is kept to a minimum because it kind of works more on the level of using sound effects. And I think I also was surprised, well, I shouldn't have been surprised, but it was recorded during lockdown as well. So I think, I wouldn't have been able to tell. You know, it sounds pretty seamless.
And there are some Big Finish that you can tell that they've all recorded separately in the early lockdown ones, not so much now. But there's certain performers who are slightly more lackluster when they are not in the company of other actors.
Yeah. You wouldn't have thought it at all. But I think if anything, it's the kind of the howling of the wind, it's the crunching in the snow, the sounds of the Grey Man crunching behind them in the gravel on the mountainside. It's kind of all those sounds that really kind of work for me. I think the only thing that took me out, well, didn't take me out of the story, but there's a lot of echo when they're outside around the mountains, and I don't know. I mean, I've never been up mountains before, so I don't know if your voice echoes up the mountains, but I would have thought it would have been a little bit, the sound would have been a little bit kind of less echoey and a little bit more flat because they're outside. But it kind of sounds like their voices are echoing slightly.
I think there probably would be an echo. I don't know. We've got our own. We're showing our ignorance here as not being too keen hikers, aren't we?
I should have gone up a mountain listening to this, and then I could have come back and told you.
Exactly. I was telling everybody to stay in and sit in a pub by a fire to listen to it. Go up a fucking mountain, guys. I too enjoyed the sparseness of the music, and there are little hints as well, I think, to the Curse of Fenric, just in terms of some of the more creepier sounds. And I just thought it was a lovely, considered, mute sound design. I know that sounds weird because obviously there's a lot of time and effort, but it is not over the top. It is subtle and it is wonderful as a result.
Yeah, and I think there's even it feels like there's a snippet which sounds similar to something from Survival or maybe Remembrance of the Daleks. Every now and again there's it's probably just, the way something's played, but it just makes me think of those later season, season 25 and 26. And it really does feel like this is a proper continuation. This could be a story within a season 27, not like bloody Thin Ice and all that lot that the missing season or the lost stories that were released. But this feels genuinely like it's a direct continuation.
In a way that those Hex stories, which you mentioned earlier, which are brilliant, but they feel like the Seventh Doctor and Ace at Big Finish doing something new. This could have been on in the winter of 1990, and I don't think you'd know the difference. And that's a very hard thing to do without pastiching it or it feeling a bit outdated and rubbish.
Yeah, it's on Earth. It's it's in a normal setting, and it's got the Brigadier in it. It's just season 27 for me.
Exactly. Is there anything else you'd like to say on this particular release?
I mean, I just wanted to kind of mention John Culshaw as the Brigadier
Of
because this
course.
was the first time that I'd heard a recast of anybody, really. I think it was. And I was dead against recasts for quite a while. And then I heard John Culshaw as the Brigadier. And of course, it's not Nicholas Courtney. And he is, I don't want to say clearly aping Nicholas Courtney, but it's his own kind of version of it. But he's clearly acting as Nicholas Courtney as the Brigadier. But I think he still manages to bring that warmth and charm to the character.
Yeah.
So I was really impressed, and it kind of opened my eyes a little bit to accept that there are, that recasts are okay. I think, as long as they're done right, and so yeah, really, I thought John Culshaw did a really good job. I like the fact that it's a small cast as well, because it's not. I'm glad that woman at the start of it, though, what's her name, Mrs. Mackenzie. My memories of her was that she was in it for the entire story, but thankfully she's gone by end of episode 1. Offering you tea, and it's like, oh my god, no. Forgot about her.
The Brigadier interpretation, the impression that he does, it's, as you say, it's very respectful. But to be honest, it's just nice to hear those guys back together. After Battlefield, you kind of want more of that. I'm not saying the Brig should have joined the TARDIS at that point, but you could see it would have been nice for them to pop in on the Brig every now and then and just have a few more adventures. And I think, it's a great shame that while he was still with us, they didn't do more of that big finish, but for some reason they didn't want it. I mean, when you've only got one release a month, you don't overuse those characters really. But
No.
So yeah, it's just nice to give the character new life and it to feel like the Brigadier that we remember from the last time we saw him on air.
And it's also interesting what they're actually doing with the Brigadier. I mean, I don't know. I mean, what did we have him in? He was in Spectre of Lanyon Moor, which was kind of in the Sixth Doctor era. But then we had him in Minuet in Hell as well. And I don't remember what he was up to in that because I've tried to erase that story from my memory. And I've succeeded. But I like that he's this kind of, he mentions that he was retired, but then he kind of came out of retirement and he's kind of like this agent for UNIT now that kind of goes out there and just does a little bit of preliminary investigation. And I kind of like that they did that with him. I don't know if they follow up on that. I don't know where this comes in in Brigadier's story.
He shows up in The Way of the Borrowman, also a Scottish adventure with the Ninth Doctor, and it's a very similar ilk.
Ah, okay. I'll have to give that one a go.
Well worth a listen. I've not heard all the Ninth Doctor audios, but Ravagers put me off, and then that one brought me back in.
Ravagers put me off, and I haven't gone back.
But yeah, so it's a lovely little story. If you are into fast-paced New Who, this might not be the one for you. But if you want a slightly more considered story that just unfolds slowly and has some nice character work and a great atmosphere, I think this is a great Doctor Who story. But we must rate it a clanger, a banger, or an average meander. What say you?
I would have to say it's a very gentle banger.
Indeed. A slow banger, if you will.
Slow banger. Slow banger by a Christmas fire.
Exactly. Brilliant stuff.
Too hot for TV.
So, Jim, look, thanks for joining me today. It's been an absolute blast to go through these two things over the last sort of hour and a half. Do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Well, I mean, I'm currently, I've got my own podcast out there called What's in the Box. We are on a sort of span off into doing 13th Doctor commentaries at the moment because the Jodie Whittaker era is my favourite New Who era, and so Jodie regularly gets mentioned on the main show. So myself and Jeff Goddard and potential guests are just going through the entire run and doing commentaries. So that's where the podcast is at the moment. So if you like your Jodie era and you like commentaries, then give it a listen.
Excellent. Next time, I'll be joined by Paul Griggs, and we'll be talking about the BBV Sontaran audio Conduct Unbecoming and the Big Finish lost story, The First Sontarans. But until next time, I've been Dylan.
I've been Jim.
And this has been Doctor Who Too Hot for TV.
Too hot for TV.
Archie Lachlan, I'll go, or Lorchlan. Auntie Lorchlan. Archie Lorchan. I'll go, well, I don't know.